All right, welcome back to the podcast. Today, we have a very special guest on, retired Colonel Brian Gilman, 26 years in the Marine Corps, including MARSOC and a bunch of other awesome Secret Squirrel stuff. He is the CEO, correct?
Yep,
of,
CEO.
Warriors and Quiet Waters. Thanks for coming on to the podcast.
Ethan, I can't tell you how much we appreciate you having us on. Thank you.
Thank you. You know, we were just talking like a little bit before, so we can hit the highlights. I mean, 26 years in the Marine Corps.
Yeah.
You know, did you initially start out off as an officer, or did you go the enlisted and then officer route, or just straight up? You know?
Yeah. I came into the Marine Corps through officer candidate school.
Okay.
I actually made the decision to join the Marine Corps about halfway through my senior year in college. Had always been inspired to serve, particularly by a couple buddies who enlisted right out of high school and fought in the Gulf War. My college football coach was a Marine Vietnam veteran who really inspired me in terms of his leadership. And ultimately, I had a friend that told me I probably ought to stop talking about it so much and do something about it. So I called the officer selection officer about halfway through my senior year. Graduated college. It still hadn't been selected by the Marine Corps, so I took a job in California working for a petroleum firm as an engineer. About 9 months into that, the Marine Corps called me, and from there I went to officer candidate school.
And that was how I always like bringing this up with you older guys. I mean, I guess I'm an older guy now too. I went in 2005, but like, yeah, I know, right? Yeah, it's like my 20 years this year in July, so that's wild. Crazy. But I know, and but you guys that were in you know, in the mid 90s, what was that environment like? You know, I always like, it's kind of like, for me, it's like a history, you know, you talk about Vietnam, you talk about, you know, Desert Storm, but even 90s, you know, it's like, it was just a different time pre 9/11, you know, everything I knew was warfare. You guys are kind of, like I said, fresh into the mid 90s, you know, there's, you know, Bosnia, Kosovo, but nothing large scale. So what was life kind of like entering, knowing you're, you know, you're going into peacetime a little bit?
Well, all of our instructors at the basic school infantry officer course, all that were veterans of the Gulf War. So they had some of that combat experience. And the really senior enlisted Marines that were in the Marine Corps at the time were, you know, the very tail end of Vietnam veterans. So, you know, a lot of experience in leadership and in combat, but, you know, my generation at that point wasn't any. The focus really then was, you know, forward presence for the Marine Corps, serving as part of our share of the national security plan. So, you know, I ultimately went to an infantry battalion in my first deployment and did 2 MU deployments based off naval shipping. So deployed twice on MUs to the Western Pacific and Southwest Asia. And that looked like 6 months of floating around the pond and coming ashore to do training with partners and getting back on the boat, going to the next place, do training with partners, get back on the boat, hit some Liberty ports. I was a single lieutenant at the time on, you know, get on these deployments, and it was a great experience. Just the experience of working with partner forces, the experience of training and employing your platoon, and just that experience for a young single Marine was incredible.
Yeah. No, I same. I knew my one enlistment at being a single Marine. It was a good time in Hawaii. Exactly. Yeah. So then when you eventually moved over, you know, 9/11 kicks off, Iraq kicks off. Where were you at those time periods? Have you made yourself over? Now I remember when MARSOC was formed. I knew a few guys. You know, again, I was a super boot. I remember seeing the Marine Corps Times headline, like MARSOC formed. I think it was like
2006.
That headline. Yeah, exactly. I think it was like February, March of 2006. I remember seeing the headline, but again, I'm sure, you know, there's different time frames, but I just remember instinctively seeing that and being like, oh shit, this is real deal. Marines are going into SOCOM. You know, where were you in that pipeline, or how did that all work out? Before we keep going with the podcast, I want to drop this week's discount code for 9line Apparel. We're not just a brand, we're a lifestyle that celebrates the spirit of freedom, courage, and American values. Go check out our gear, including hoodies, glassware, flags, jackets, hats, patches, and much more. All material is ethically sourced, so every shirt you buy is free of slave labor. As a veteran-owned and operated company, we also take pride in giving back to those who've served. Your purchase helps us contribute to charitable initiatives supporting veterans and first responders. This episode's discount code is WAQWF20 for 20% off 9line Apparel products. Whiskey Alpha Quebec Whiskey 20, not 10, not 15, 20%, not 25 because that's a bit excessive. So get over to the store and get yourself 20% off your next purchase. While you're at it, like, listen, and subscribe to the 9 Line Apparel podcast for future discount codes and much more conversations with amazing guests like today. Now back to the podcast.
Yeah, on 9/11, I was actually assigned to 1st Reconnaissance Battalion. I'd been selected by the battalion commander to stand up a new company, the Battalion Charlie Company. So was getting ready to take on that task, and 9/11 hit. Ultimately deployed as a company commander of C Company during the invasion of Iraq. Went back the following deployment as the battalion operations officer for 1st Reconnaissance Battalion. And then when the decision was made to establish MARSOC, I was actually the reconnaissance advocate at Headquarters Marine Corps. So I was, for easiest way to explain it, I was the Marine Corps program manager for reconnaissance capability. So it fell on me and my team to figure out how to rebuild the force reconnaissance capability that we used to build MARSOC. If you remember, the majority of the structure and the Marines that formed MARSOC were our force reconnaissance battalions, and another unit, I can't remember which one. So it fell to me and my team to figure out how to rebuild that force reconnaissance company when I was assigned to the Pentagon. So, yeah.
Nice. So then, sorry, go ahead.
No, I was going to say it was an interesting experience, getting to, we traveled across the Marine Corps, talking to every MEF about how we were going to do this, what the effects would be. I ultimately briefed the executive offsite, which is the commandant and all of the Marine Corps 3-stars, on the plan to rebuild the force reconnaissance capability in the Marine Corps. So yeah, really, really fulfilling job because, we were able to do that, get that done, as well as a lot of other capability development for ground reconnaissance. Most people will tell you that their tour in the Pentagon is something they're really glad they had, but they're glad it's behind them. And, that was my experience as well.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Well, again, that was, I remember a little bit of a, I also come from the infantry, 3 deployments, Iraq, Afghanistan, scout sniper. So I remember those years were kind of disruptive. I remember with MARSOC, and I'm sure you ran into it yourself, which was, recon, and just, we're both infantry guys. So it's kind of like one of those things of like the frustration with the Marine Corps, because of the US SOCOM. You had force, but force always felt like it was lingering or so, it was like, well, they're not fully SOCOM, but they're kind of attached. Well, they kind of do this. Well, then they're at the mercy of the commander, and obviously every other branch, SEALs, special forces, especially special forces and Delta and Rangers and all that stuff. So, you're essentially MARSOC's being formed, and it's taking the assets of the force recon. And I remember there was some years, I remember guys were talking, it was like, was there even a force at one? I mean, you said you were rebuilding it, but I mean, you had taken the most experienced operators, these or the, SOCOM had. And I remember there was a rebuilding period of a little bit, kind of a bit of a lost souls, or, recon was kind of in that ether too of well, what's recon doing? What's, force, what's the point of force? What was that feeling like? I mean, you were kind of right there at the groundwork of those emotions and commands. I'm sure there was arguments. I'm sure there was back and forth. I mean, there's still this day, there's still, Marine, arguments with Marines and SOCOM and MARSOC and all that stuff. So although caveat, I got to film with the Recon Marines, just the Recon, and I was blown away by the assets they have now. I filmed with them in 2021. Yeah. And I was impressed. I was so happy because they were we have a whole pipeline. I mean, these kids were I call them kids, and they were just oh no, we go to jump. We got Halo. We have scuba. We have, we're getting sniper. I mean, it was a pipeline, and they had the dual nods. They had the Polaris Razor or whatever they were using at the time. And they had all the assets, and he goes, it's just it's school after school after school. And the Marine Corps is really pumping money into recon. And I was sitting there laughing, and they were like, what? I was like, dude, back in my day, I was like, we trained with the recon guys, going through sniper school. I was like, you were lucky to get one school. It was either you go to jump school or you went to sniper school. Yeah. And then, that was it. Maybe you might get some other high speed stuff, but there was no, they called it a pipeline, but I was like, that's not the pipeline you guys have now. So what was that like then, in those early years? Yeah.
What were the years that you were in?
I was 05 to 09, end of 09. So
so you You were right at the beginning of that process. So the Corps went without a force reconnaissance capability for a couple of years after we
Okay, that's what I thought. Okay, yeah.
after we established MARSOC, and ultimately, what we did was we established a company-sized element within each recon battalion as a force reconnaissance company. Looked a lot different than what force reconnaissance was before we stood up MARSOC. It was essentially a battalion level organization that we called a company. The capability that we were able to rebuild because of budgets and a lot of other constraints was to create that force reconnaissance capability in one company in a reconnaissance battalion. And then that company was assigned tactical control to the MEF commander. So that one company within a reconnaissance battalion worked for the MEF commander. And then as part of that, we were then developing the capabilities that we wanted in the Marine Corps. We'd done a 3-year study looking forward 10 years in terms of what reconnaissance capability the Marine Corps needed. And we put a plan in place to, man, train, and equip that force. So, we did everything from consolidating the initial reconnaissance training to the West Coast. At SOI West, we had BRCs on the East and West Coast, consolidated all that training at the School of Infantry West. So there was one BRC, and then started slowly building that pipeline to build that true capability. And it took years to get there. And that's, the Marines you talked to were the beneficiaries of all that work that happened starting in 2006 to build that capability. It's referred to by old timers like me as fixed recon. I'm sure you heard that term before. So that's what it was like. And, the Marine Corps invested heavily in its reconnaissance capability and continues to today. So, that's a capability that's designed to provide Marine commanders that reconnaissance capability. Whereas MARSOC, they're assigned to SOCOM. They work and take their direction from US SOCOM. So, the force reconnaissance platoons on MUSOCs were the core of that special operations capability that the MUs had, that and some special aviation capability. They still provide that to our Marine Expeditionary units. But, the MARSOC is truly now the Marine Corps' component to special operations. Yep.
And then, like you said, there was, like I said, I know there was some internal fighting with that, or it was kind of crazy too. It was such a new time because at the end of my enlistment, I had done 3 pumps, had worked with special forces, was attached to a team, all this stuff. And we kind of thought about it, MARSOC. And again, those were the MARSOC, this was end of 2009. And I remember they were desperate for operators, guys that were just like combat experience, and I think that was always the challenge with the Marine Corps, for at least coming from my experience, and I'm sure you too, are talking to your guys. It's like your first 4 years in the infantry are your best for it. That's, that's typically, otherwise you got to e-bill or you got to move out or do something. And, I remember just talking with the MARSOC guys, and they were really cool, and hate to say it. Obviously, long story short, I got out and contracted, so it was like, well, guys, what kind of bonuses is there? And they're like, there are none. I'm like, oh, that's a tough one. but regardless though, so standing all that up and kind of said rebuilding, recon and force and all this other stuff, moving on from there, you said you eventually went to MARSOC then, or that was like, the chief of staff then,
so I was never an operator in MARSOC. I didn't go through assessment and selection in MARSOC. The way it worked out was I was post battalion command. I commanded 1st Recon in the last deployment. 1st Recon Battalion did to Afghanistan. From there, got assigned back to the Pentagon on the Joint Staff. Was selected for colonel while I was on the Joint Staff. Got orders to Okinawa, Japan, as the junior colonel to join 3rd Marine Division over there. And literally, my family and I were unpacking our household goods in Okinawa. I got a call that notified me that I'd been selected to command the training center at MARSOC. So 0 MARSOC experience at that point, but I did a 9-month tour in Okinawa. Then we PCS back to Camp Lejeune, and I took command of what's now the Marine Raider Training Center. So that's a training unit at MARSOC that runs MARSOC's assessment and selection and runs all the formal special operations schools and courses. So I had 14 high-risk special operations training courses that the training center conducted, as well as assessment and selection. Served in that billet for 2 years as the commander, and then the commanding general selected me to be the chief of staff at MARSOC. And that's where I was at. I was a year into the chief's billet when I made the decision to retire from the Corps and come here to join Warriors and Quiet Waters team. So
that's awesome.
Yeah, it was MARSOC was an incredible experience. the thing that I loved the most about MARSOC was that, every Marine that was there because they wanted to be and work with the best Marines in the Marine Corps. They knew what they were there for. They were dedicated to that mission. And it was just an incredible experience being able to unleash that caliber Marines against, big problems and big opportunities and seeing what they could do. That's why MARSOC is the incredible force that it is today. And really getting immersed in the pipeline for bringing Marines in, turning them into Marine Raiders. I got to see thousands of Marines from across the Marine Corps come through assessment and selection. I was there, and once again, just incredible Marines trying really, really hard things, and seeing those that succeeded and those that unfortunately didn't. It was an incredible experience, and seeing the instructor cadre and their professionalism and how they do that. MARSOC's assessment and selection is a professional run establishment. We stole a lot of the learnings from the other services and how they did assessment and selection, and kind of took the best of all of them and built MARSOC's assessment and selection. And it's a rigorous process that produces the Marines that the Marine Reconnaissance or Special Operations Forces need. So, yeah, that's my MARSOC story.
No, that's cool. I mean, it's really awesome because I think because it's still new. I mean, I hate to say it. I mean, even though the GWAT's over and we're in 2025. I mean, it's 20 years on, but it's still in the grand scheme of SOCOM. Everyone else was established in the 50s. They have a solid 70-year. They got another 50-year jump on the Marine Corps. So it's still kind of funny because I hear about it and it's just so rare, and I kind of appreciate that as a Marine, being like, yeah, all the MARSOCs are still. It's still like a rare breed. A lot of special forces guys. You start running into them a lot more. SEALs. Everything's very much out there now. But honestly, it's probably a good thing. It's still kind of like the silent professionals. The MARSOC isn't out there as much when it comes to, like, I don't know what the pipeline, or or assessment and selection, like A&S. I have no idea what MARSOC does. I know to the T what Green Berets do. We all know what SEALs do. And even a little bit with like Recon, we kind of know a little bit. But I mean, the A&S is not it's not all out there. Like, we don't have a ton of information. So, like, I don't even know. I mean, I assume there's a water portion. You know what I mean? Like, I remember there was like a debate about that, because it's like, what is the, especially during the GWAT, it's all land warfare, but at the same breath, you drew from Recon, which was typically water based, more water based, and one, or, within tactics and stuff like that. So it's always kind of fun to hear about the MARSOC, because it eludes me, or, it's just, there's not as many operators. They're young, the stories or just are all out there yet. But
I won't go into all the details, but generally what MARSOC assessment and selection looks like is this 2 phases. The first phase is really focused on physical capability. That's where all the work in the pool happens. The pool is the great equalizer. Doesn't matter how great of an athlete you are, the pool is gonna really test your limits. So they spend a lot of time in the water, a lot of time doing other physical activities. And that really, what that really shows us is those that have the physical capability and aren't going to quit. And then they move to phase 2, where it's a combination of those physical aspects in a field environment, plus a whole lot of the aspects of the mind, the brain, how they lead, how they think, how they solve problems, how they can build rapport. They're throwing the gamut of that in phase 2. And really, MARSOC assessment and selection collects about 3,000 data points on every Marine through assessment and selection. And then it's a very rigorous board process where all those data points are taken into account, and ultimately goes into a board of senior leaders from MARSOC that ultimately make the selections based on that data. So, like I said, it's a very professionally run, rigorous assessment and selection. It's taking the best of what we saw from the other services. So, and it's producing a great capability. The MARSOC is the smallest element within U.S. SOCOM, and so there's definitely a lot fewer raiders. We've been around a lot less, but one of the talking points that when I was at MARSOC was 10% of the mission for 5% of the budget. MARSOC's portion of the U.S. SOCOM budget was 5%, yet we took on 10% of the mission. So we're a very economical force for U.S. SOCOM as well.
Yeah.
Yep.
Marines are always going to Marine.
Yep, they are. Absolutely.
Yeah, which I appreciate. So yeah, I'm sure the stuff they get is pretty proficient for guys coming from the line and everything.
Yep.
So
Yep.
you know,
Absolutely.
so happy campers, you know.
Yep.
But
Yep.
that's awesome. So then, you know, coming from, you know, MARSOC and deciding to retire, you know, what made you want to shift, and what drew you to Warriors and Quiet Waters? Like, what was that kind of evolution? And obviously you got a lot of time on ground, like, too. I know you have your deployment to Afghanistan with Recon as a battalion commander. I know that can be pretty rough on, you know, at times.
Yeah.
So what kind of head did you choose to go to say, hey, I'm going to, you know?
Yeah. So it really started in 2013 when I got that assignment at the Joint Staff. I thought I was checking into the J3 on the Joint Staff, which is the Operations Directorate. And when I showed up at the Joint Staff Personnel Office, I was told by an Air Force warrant officer on the other side of the desk that when he took my orders, he looked at him and he said, "Hey, sir, you're not going to the J3, you're going to the Chairman's Office of Reintegration." And my question to him was, "Well, what is that?" And his response was, "I don't know, but here's the number of your boss. Give him a call and he can tell you about it." And the name on the piece of paper was Colonel Jim Eisenhower, a U.S. Army colonel. Gave him a call and he explained that he led this office that Admiral Mullen stood up within the office of the chairman when he was the chairman of the Joint Chiefs to lead the military services efforts in creating effective reintegration pathways for veterans coming out of the military at the time. So I spent 3 years in that role as the national organizations director for that office, traveling around the company as a convener, around the country as a convener, a thought leader, and I got the opportunity to bump up against probably 400 different veteran serving nonprofits, talk to thousands of veterans, corporations, communities that were all trying to help veterans come home after their military service. And in that role, I really fell in love with the idea of working for a nonprofit because I'd seen so many in the mission-driven work that they did, the passion that I saw in the work that they did, and decided then that when I retired, I was going to try to work for a nonprofit. And it was either going to be serving veterans or serving conservation issues, my other big passion. Fast forward to my time at MARSOC, I'm a year into the Chief's billet. I committed to my commanding general to do 2 years as his chief. And my cousin who lives here in Bozeman, Montana, called me and told me that Warriors and Quiet Waters was looking for a new executive director. I was post-command at that time. My colonel command time was over. I really didn't have any interest in becoming a general officer in my MOS. So I was going to do my second year as a chief and then take another move and use my last 3 years in the Corps to get to 30 and use that as my transition time. But when I heard about the job opening, I called a guy who I knew here in Bozeman who used to be the board chair of Warriors and Quiet Waters and just asked him, I said, "Hey, what are you guys looking for? Would I be a good fit?" And he thought I'd be a great fit. So I threw my name into the hat. Went through about 3 months of interviewing with Warriors and Quiet Waters, flew back here twice to interview, and ultimately was offered the job. And I'll be honest, it was about a 5-minute conversation with my wife. I mean, we knew it was the right thing to do. It was everything I was looking for. I was, coming home to my home state in Montana, in the town my mother lived in a nonprofit leadership role, serving veterans. It was exactly what I was looking for. So it was a pretty quick decision. The hard part was I was very concerned about my commanding general and what his reaction would be when I told him that I was leaving a year early. General Yu was a great commander and I loved working for him, but you didn't want to get on his bad side. And the way that I thought about it was I'm going to approach this is going to the CG and tell him I got a problem that I want him to help me solve. And that's how I opened it with him. I got this problem and explained it to him. And after about 30 minutes of conversation, General Yu's like, "Yeah, Brian, I hate to lose you, but I think this is the right thing for you to do." So that made it easy. Submitted my retirement papers, got out of the Marine Corps in 4 months, got out here to Bozeman in June, started the job on July 6th of 2020, right in the middle of the COVID pandemic. So, yeah.
How was that transition, jumping in from, 26 years right in the middle of the pandemic?
Yeah, I mean, it was the state was still shut down. I mean, we weren't doing any in-person programming when I arrived. The staff had pivoted quickly to put together a virtual program during the pandemic, but the restrictions in the state of Montana lifted about 3 weeks after I got here, and we got to work getting back out serving veterans in person. Had to start from ground zero with placing our participants because we you remember back then, everybody was concerned about flying on airplanes and all that.
Yeah,
and
yeah.
So we decided that we were going to recruit veterans that could drive to Montana for the program. So we quickly started reaching out and finding veterans that could benefit from the program, and started getting them back outdoors in our program.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
And so I appreciate Montana. I look at properties every once in a while out there. It's beautiful. I love it. Yeah. I always try to get some projects that get out there or something like that. I love Montana. It's a gorgeous spot.
Yeah. I'm very biased. It's my home state. But the biggest treasure in my mind that we have here, two things are the people, and the second thing is the access to public lands. Being able to access the millions of acres of public lands that are here available in Montana. It's how I grew up. It's what's always been important to me. And it's also what, to be honest, gives us a lot of the ability to do what we do in Warriors and Quiet Waters as well. So it's continues to be the last best place. So
awesome.
Yeah.
So then we can definitely jump into Warriors and Quiet Waters. What exactly is the mission set? And then how do Veterans Apply, go from step 1 to step 10? What's that process?
Yeah, so Warriors and Quiet Waters has evolved over time. It was founded in 2007 by another Marine colonel. His name's Eric Hastings. He grew up here in Bozeman, lifelong fly fisherman, was a Vietnam era veteran, so he flew A-4 Skyhawks in Vietnam, flew 168 combat missions in Vietnam, lost 5 pilots in his squadron, came home suffering from post-traumatic stress, even though it wasn't a diagnosable condition at the time. And to hear Eric tell a story, he found meaning in healing from what he experienced in combat through fly fishing here in Montana. Eric went on to serve a 30-year career. He was actually the chief of staff of 1 MEF during the Gulf War, retired right after that as a colonel, came back to Bozeman, and on a fly fishing trip with his wife, Jean, in Canada, she had mentioned to him in just a passing comment that she wishes that they could share this experience that they were having together with all the wounded warriors that were coming home at the time. And Eric told her, hey, that's a really good idea. Let's talk about it on the drive home, which they did. By the time they got back to Bozeman, they had an idea what they wanted to do. They convened a public meeting to get a bunch of volunteers together. And then once they had a plan, Eric flew down to Balboa Naval Medical Center and convinced the medical staff to put our first cohort of veterans on a military flight up here in 2007. And what the program looked like then, it was a week-long fly fishing experience. So it was a week-long immersion in nature and fly fishing that was designed to provide respite to critically wounded warriors that were coming right out of the medical centers, connect them with all the benefits that we receive from spending time outdoors, teaching them a skill, fly fishing, and then connecting them to other warriors that were going through similar experiences, as well as all the civilian volunteers that cared so deeply about them. And that's how we started. And that model worked for many, many years. And, I've talked to alumni who came through the program back then, and they will tell you that week-long fly fishing experience was a life-changing experience for them. Mm-hmm. But the warriors changed over time, and their needs changed over time. And about 2019, our board of directors recognized that we weren't getting the same service members. They weren't coming out right out of the medical centers anymore. They had different needs, and the program needed to evolve with them. And that was really the board's direction to me, was maximize our impact, maximize the potential of this organization. We recognize that our program needs to change in order to do that, and that's what we needed to do. So when I got here, we got to work doing that. And in 2023, we launched an entirely new program called Built for More. So the program's transformed from what was that week-long experience to what is now a 9-month-long program that's still built around immersive activities in nature, but is designed to provide veterans the opportunity to build strength in what we call the pillars of a thriving life. And this is all based on a ton of research that we've done on human well-being and thriving. There's been research going on since about the 1960s on what it takes for human beings to thrive. And we keyed in on a couple key models. I'm sure you've heard of the Maslow hierarchy of needs, in terms of that's one model of mental well-being. And then we found what's considered today the most empirically rigorous model of mental well-being is Dr. Carol Riff's 6-factor model of mental well-being. And we built a program around that. So there's 6 pillars that our program's designed to build strength in. The first is a strong sense of security. The second is, 3 things every veteran loses when they leave the military is they lose their identity, they lose their purpose, and they lose their community. Those are three additional pillars in the Built for More program model, helping them rediscover who they are now that they're no longer on active duty, help them understand what their core values are, because your core values really drive the decisions that you make, the actions that you take. Help them understand how they can attain their full potential as a veteran, and ultimately, how do they live a life of purpose and meaning so that their future looks as meaningful as their past in the military did. And purpose isn't something that you find, it's something that you craft. And our program is designed to help them do that over about a 9-month-long period. And it's anchored on the beginning and the end on what we call peak experiences in nature. So we'll bring veterans as cohorts through this program. Cohorts of 7 veterans come together for the program. First thing that they do is they fly to Montana for their initial experience. And there's 3 different tracks. There's a fishing track, fly fishing, there's an archery hunting track, and there's a photography track. So that whatever track they're in will determine what activity they do while they're here. But that first week is all about getting them equipped with the equipment to do that activity, and it's theirs to keep free because we want them to go home and continue doing it. Hooking them up with subject matter experts to help them build skills in those different activities. Spend a ton of time outdoors, and we can talk about the benefits of nature if you want. I can go down a rabbit hole on that if you'd like.
Absolutely, yeah, 100%.
We'll come back to that. And then we start them on what we call the guided discovery process while we're here, which is that 9-month program to build strength in those pillars of a thriving life. And what that looks like is a whole bunch of journaling prompts that they get to journal on during the course of the week, because we know the benefits from our research of journaling in self-discovery and problem solving, as well as some facilitated discussions led by our facilitators. And this is all non-clinical, 100% non-clinical. So they'll do that every day as well while they're here. And then they return home and they continue to engage with the program remotely from their homes as a cohort. So we built those pillars out into 6 different modules that spread out over about 9 months. And the participants will access online learning that we've built. They'll do individual learning activities to reinforce the learning around those pillars. They'll do a whole bunch of more journaling prompts. They'll do peer-to-peer guided discussions. And then every module culminates in a cohort-wide facilitated discussion along that module. And we've also started them on a base of holistic wellness. So we have nutrition coaches on our staff. We have mindfulness coaches on our staff. There's a spiritual fitness aspect of our program as well that we get them started on while they're here. So they're building that base of holistic wellness, building strength in these pillars through that remote access of our program. And then at the very end, they come back to Montana or one of the other locations where we do our programming for what we call the capstone experience. And that capstone experience is designed to do a couple things. First, get them back out in nature. 2, get them connected back with that cohort. Because what we're trying to do is build them a new team that's going to be a team for life for them. And then give them, through the guided discussions and the journaling prompts that they experienced during the capstone, the ability to put the whole program into context and figure out how they're going to apply it in their lives moving forward. And that takes about 9 months, depending on the cohort. And once they're done with that, they go into our alumni engagement program, which is designed to keep them connected to the other Warriors and Quiet Waters alums, as well as connected to the organization for life. So it's a very rigorous program that's built on empirical evidence. And we know our outcomes because we measure what we do. We work with the Institute for Veterans and Military Families at Syracuse University to do our annual impact evaluation. So IVMF will collect data on our participants prior to coming to the program to establish a baseline, twice during the program, immediately after the program, and then annually thereafter, so that we can measure change over these outcomes that we're trying to achieve. And they'll do all the analysis against that data. They'll do statistical tests to make sure it's statistically significant and not subject to bias. And then they report our results to us every year. And what we're seeing as a result of the program is we have veteran participants coming into our program that their sense of thriving is well below the national American population's average. They're not doing well. By the time they complete Built for More, we've moved them from below the national average to above the national average in their sense of thriving, in their sense of purpose. Their feelings of connection to a community that matters to them and to having people that they can rely on is increased tenfold as a result of their participation in the program. The anxiety that they were experiencing on a normal basis prior to coming through the program has melted away by the end of the program. And they're feeling like they can deal with the adversity that inevitably comes our way in life. So it's having an exceptional impact on the veterans that come through the program, all designed to launch them off on a life of thriving and purpose after service. So Yeah.
No, that's fantastic. I mean, like I said, I myself getting out in 2009, I remember those days. You know, it was a bit of a shit show. You know, I consider myself fortunate. I identified a lot of stuff before I got out. I was very goal driven, so I was like, all right, I need to get back into the sandbox. I need to get back into contracting. You know, I played video games until midnight. You know, drinking rum and cokes. That lasted for about a month.
Yeah.
And I knew it too. Like I was like, I need to get out of here. Like I need to get back into the fight in some aspect. And contracting was my decompression, ironically. I think a lot, you know, it's like still in the community. And it's kind of like when people are talking about that 10, 15 years later, like I was fortunate enough to kind of identify subconsciously, like my community's out there in Afghanistan. I'm making money and I'm like slowly decompressing from not from the community, but from kind of the job. You know, I'm still kind of doing the job. I'm in Afghanistan. My paycheck's about 5-6 times bigger, and I can do whatever I want. And I'm going home, and I can kind of now decompress again every rotation back over. You know, and it's like have my community, have my friends, like you know, and then I'd go fly and see friends, and you know, but I knew a lot of friends that didn't do that. Actually, most of them, about 99% of them, you know, try to go to college and it's a nightmare. You know, it's an absolute disconnect. You know, and like a lot of Marines or a lot of infantry guys, we like to just tough through it. You know, just kind of bury that shit and move forward. But I've seen a lot of guys start talking about in the last like 4 or 5 years, like even myself, where it's like, yeah, we probably should identify some of these problems. We should probably figure some of this stuff out. Like, you know, guys are having panic attacks or they're you know, going into deeper states of depression or, you know, and it's great hearing what you guys are saying, like, especially on the mentality side and like what people are trying to do. I mean, finding a purpose. I mean, what kind of stuff are they doing? Or, you know, have you seen that where, you know, cause not everyone's into, you know, hunting, fishing, photography. Is there paths that guy, I mean, that sounds amazing. That photography route, I was like, that sounds awesome, you know, especially in Montana. But what is like, you know, guys that are coming through that are, you know, do they find another route? Do they, or at least identify, you know, like, okay, maybe I want to build computers or some weird shit, you know, something that's, you know, I imagine the paths and everything. And then the going through what you guys are helping them with helps them establish that. Like, you know, have you guys seen, like, how do they end up getting to that point? You know,
we have, you know, really what one of the things we caution our warriors coming through the program is don't fall into what we call the identity and purpose trap. And what we mean by that is don't build your identity and your purpose around a singular thing that can be taken away from you. And you may not find your purpose in your occupation. That, you know, is I'm sure a bunch of your friends have found out that's really hard to do in the civilian world. You know, and I'm sure that I'm making an assumption here, but I'm guessing that as you were going back on those contracting deployments, that you were still finding a sense of purpose, that you were doing good, that you were having an impact. So, you know, that in many ways, that's really hard to find in civilian jobs. So, you know, you got to look beyond the job. You got to make sure that it's not a singular thing that can be taken away from you, and build your purpose around that. Because the fact is that change is going to happen in your life. Adversity is going to happen. And as long as you're building your purpose around something that you get to control, you're going to be much more fulfilled. You're going to have a much more meaningful life. You know, so a lot of our participants are really building their sense of purpose around the impact that they can have on their community, the impact that they have on their family, their friends, the community that they live in, how they can continue to serve and lead in that way. You know, but we have seen some incredible stories coming out of the program. Last year, we had a U.S. Navy SEAL that came through the program. It spent 15 years in the SEAL teams as a medic. Came to our program last year, the Build for More program. I got an opportunity to go into the backcountry in Montana with him during his capstone experience. Got an opportunity to talk to him a lot about the impact that the program was having. And then after the program, what he told us was a couple key things. Number one, the connections that he made with the other veterans in his cohort were stronger than any connections he's been able to make since he got out of the SEAL teams. Number one. So he's got a new team, and that team kept him accountable and gave him somebody that he could rely on. And number two, he told us that he made more progress in his mental health journey in the 9 months of this Build for More program than he did through 20 years of formal counseling prior to that. You know, he was able to connect the dots in a different way, and he was able to figure out really what he exists on the earth for. And he's now the senior physician's assistant in the Virginia Beach Healthcare Network, leading 90 other physician's assistants in that healthcare network and thriving and building it, building his skills as a leader, giving back to his community. There's many examples like that. As I said earlier in the podcast, purpose isn't something you find, it's something you craft. You got to build it yourself, and it's got to come from within you. And we walk them through a process to help them key in on that. And those are the kind of changes that we're seeing as a result of the program. And it's eye water. And I got a LinkedIn message a couple of days ago from a alum of our program. He's actually the son of a Marine that I served with. His dad reached out to me. He was concerned about his son wasn't doing well. I gave his son a call, convinced him to apply to the program. He's come through the program, and he sent me a LinkedIn message last Saturday saying, "Hey, Brian, I just want to reach out to you and let you know I've been thinking a lot, and I can't tell you how much my life has changed since I walked aboard Quiet Waters Ranch, and I can't thank you enough." So it's getting things like that make this hard work worth it every single day. So it fills me with purpose.
Yeah. And what's what do you think is that little bit of magic there in Montana?
Yeah.
It helps a lot,
So let's talk about that. Let's talk about that.
Yeah.
So, what we try to do is we try to create peak experiences in nature for our participants. And that's an experience that they walk away from with an incredible sense of awe, wonder, and gratitude. And we do this because we know the benefits that nature and awe, those things provide for us as human beings. I grew up a lifelong outdoorsman here in Montana, started hunting and fishing at a young age. It's always been a part of who I was. And I was able to make meaning of my combat experiences here in the mountains of Montana, pursuing elk with a bow in my hand. And I knew what nature did for me. I didn't understand why until I got here and started diving into the research. And the fact is that, there's some basic table stakes that we get just from spending time in nature. The first is some physiological changes that happen just by being in nature, disconnected from this thing. And what those are is when we're in nature, disconnected from our digital world, our cortisol levels start dropping. So our stress and our anxiety is going down. Our serotonin levels are going up. So our sense of hopefulness, our ability to look forward into the future with a more positive optimism is increased. Spending time out in the natural light, it helps our circadian rhythm. We sleep better. We're typically more physically active when we're in nature. So it gets our bodies moving again. And there's a ton of research out there about how physical activity is probably one of the best harbingers against mental health issues. It makes our mental health strong as well. That even the killer cells in our body that fight disease, the production of killer cells goes up just by spending time in nature. And then when you pair that with an activity like fly fishing, archery hunting, or photography, you get some additional benefits. The first is those are activities that require a light focus. They don't require you to focus like you're trying to solve a calculus problem. They require a light focus. They're enjoyable, so you're getting comfort out of them. And as a result of that, your brain is starting to dump dopamine into your system. And the parts of your brain that are most active when you're lightly focused start working in the background on problems that you've been thinking about, dealing with. It's referred to in some circles as the shower effect. Have you ever heard of that?
No.
Have you ever had an epiphany in the shower?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. So that's what's going on. You're comfortable. Your body's dropping dopamine into your system. That makes you more creative. And then this, what's called the default mode network in your brain, those areas of the brain that are most active when you're lightly focused are firing, and they're solving problems in the background. Things that you've been thinking hard about, and that's one of the ways that you arrive at epiphanies. So we use these recreational experiences in nature to create the psychological and emotional conditions in the veterans themselves to be ready to take on the harder aspects of the program. That's really what we use it. We call it recreation for a purpose. It's not a fly fishing trip. It's not a hunting trip. It's recreation for a purpose. And that purpose is to prepare them to figure out how they're going to live a life of thriving and purpose after military service. And, let's be honest, it's also a bunch of fun. There are a lot of veteran programs out there that do similar things, but most of that happens in a conference room or a counselor's office. The fact is that our program is not only incredibly impactful, but it's incredibly enjoyable as well. and you get to see some amazing places in Montana. And that's, I'm guessing that's one of the reasons that we've had such high demand for the program.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I appreciate that follow on too. I mean, like I said, doing the 9-month program, giving a skill that people can come back to, and a community to come back to.
Yeah,
I'm a part of a Warfighter Scuba Foundation.
Yeah,
and so we do that. We it's growing, but it's at the same thing. Like right now, we're at the point where like, hey, we give the goggles and everything, but at one point we'd like to be like, hey, here's the full kit, like full VCDs and everything, because you can go do this. And everybody that's gone through the program, and sometimes they're just not, I'm from Minnesota and I've been diving for 10 years, and I got part of the foundation probably about 2-3 years ago. And it's you get to go dive in Roatan or down in Florida, and you really like all the physical benefits, but then you can take that and be like, hey, if you want to go, if you're in the southern states, it works a little bit better. If you're in the northern states, not so much, but you do get to look forward to, even if it's like once a year or maybe or so, like you get your wife into it. Like we're big on couples coming down, doing everything with, and the guys get exhausted because it's physically exhausting. I mean, if Joe's running it, it's going to be 4 dives a day. And it's all, no one drinks, but it doesn't matter because you're asleep by 8 p.m. as it is, like, so that walking away with the community, and then also with a drive to keep going, like I said, with the skills and finding out the follow on is what was really important. I think, I'm sure you saw it too when you were part of the Pentagon, or, going around the nation at that point in time, as we all know with nonprofits, it's like some pop up and then they disappear, or some, and some were good. I didn't start participating until about 2022, but I'd heard about other ones though, it sounded fun, but I had talked to guys that had been through that for the last 10 years, and they were like, yeah, it used to be a lot of fun, go drinking, tell your war stories, but then it would always kind of, fall apart, or they would always kind of go back to square one.
Yeah.
And it was always, good nature. Everyone was trying to help. But I think now that we are on, like I said, your organization and some others that have kind of stuck it out through the years, you have that follow on is what matters. Cause I feel like a lot of guys, like even like myself, that didn't go initially, it took 15 years or not close, about 15 years to finally be like, you know what? Yeah, I'm going to go and try this out. I think it's the time for my life that I need this, to find that purpose again, or find the community again, I think, and help in that aspect, I think I've seen a lot of that. I shouldn't say a trend, but I feel like a lot of veterans in our era are now, the guys that were kind of buried it, now they are coming out and be like, hey, I could use something like this. Are you guys kind of seeing that trend, opposed to like guys coming right out of the gate, kind of seeing the 10 years down the road type stuff?
Yeah. The average age of our participants over the last 5 years has been 45. So, and it's a mix of, just last week in our hunting program, we still had an active duty soldier. He's still on active duty, getting ready to retire. We had, a bunch of what were senior enlisted leaders when they got out of the military that had been out for anywhere between 5 to 10 years. So we're seeing, a very small portion of currently active duty service members, a very small portion of they're really close to their transition. And then the majority of them are a little bit further away from that transition. When they, like you said, I think they realize they can take advantage of opportunities like our program to work on some of the things that they've been struggling with over the course of their time since they got out of the military. So it's generally the 45-year-old range, mostly enlisted. Most of our participants come from the United States Army. Big surprise there. It's the biggest service, followed by the Marine Corps, then the Navy, then the Air Force, and a couple Coast Guard veterans as well. So, yeah.
And then, like I said, in generalities too, I mean, when it comes to these guys going through the programs, are you seeing kind of like I don't know, like I said, I know the trend, I was going to say the trend, but like I said, the trend are a little bit older, like you said, they're 45, generally enlisted. Is there a reason why you think that is, opposed to, like, 'cause you're an officer yourself, why is it more enlisted? Or is it just because of the mass quantity there's more enlisted than there are officers, and typically in combat roles as well.
Yeah, I'm gonna give you my opinion on this. I have no data, but I think I think one of the reasons, let's be honest, I think that officers are afforded more opportunities than enlisted service members, which is incredibly frustrating for me working with some of the the caliber of senior enlisted leaders that I work with in the military and seeing what they were capable of. My chief program officer is a retired master guns. Went and got his MBA after he got out of the military. And he really struggled to find those real leadership opportunities for a long time, mostly because he was an enlisted guy. I think officers are given more opportunities. That's probably one reason. Once again, that's my opinion. I have no data to back that up. The second is that, from talking to a lot of participants coming through our program, I think there's a sense that, a lot of officers aren't applying because they don't want to take a space that someone else that could benefit from it more would benefit from. We hear that from a lot of our participants, is it took them a long time to apply because they didn't think they were as worthy as someone else that could benefit from the program. We work through that with them and make it clear to them that's not the case. We had a retired Marine colonel come through our program last year. I worked closely with him throughout my career in the Marine Corps. He was one of the heavy hitter Marine colonels in the Marine Corps, and he came through our program and he benefited from it immensely. I've talked to general officers that struggle with this. They retire from the military after 30, 35, 40 years, and all of a sudden they don't have a sense of purpose anymore. They don't know who they are. So this challenge affects every veteran. It's not just enlisted. Like I said, even general officers struggle with these challenges of how do I make my future as important, as meaningful as my past in the military? Yeah. And that's what our program is designed to help them do. So, yep.
Yeah. Well, that's like I said, it's always good to know, kind of like I said, I'm sure you guys want to know that trend and statistics too, but no, that's awesome. So then for guys looking to do this, then where can they find you, or what can they, say, hey, I think this is for me? Is there like a checklist? Because it's an intensive program. I mean, 9 months is a lot. This isn't like, hey, we're going on a hunting safari and good luck and we'll see you later. What is, what should candidates or guys that want to, and gals that want to participate in this program, almost kind of be like, hey, is this program for you, or maybe you should try something else? You know what I'm saying? Like maybe like for me, this sounds awesome, but I think, there is, like, I have Warfighter Scuba. So I go, is there's guys that could go that route or somewhere else, or what is the qualifier for, I don't say an intensive program, but it's definitely much more involved. What should people, guys, tell themselves to be like, hey, this is probably for me and this is what I should do?
Yeah. So in terms of how you get involved, you go to our website, WQWF.org. There you can apply to get on the wait list. The challenge we're facing is that this year we had 7 times more veterans apply than we had capacity to serve. So we have a very rigorous selection process to identify 2 things in the veterans that are applying: high fit and high need. And I'll explain how that works. But really, if you go to our website, there's a pretty good video at the beginning that really explains what the Built for More program is, what it's intended to do, what it is not, and that will help people determine whether or not it's the right program for them. But what we're really looking for is we're looking for post 9/11 combat veterans, and the way that we define that is that you served in the post 9/11 era and you deployed to a theater where you were collecting imminent danger pay. You don't have to have a Purple Heart. You don't have to have a Valor Award. You don't necessarily have to have a combat infantryman's badge or a combat action ribbon. But you had to have deployed to a theater of combat in the post 9/11 era, and you have to have some service-related challenge that you're dealing with and be able to articulate that. So you get on the wait list. We notify you when the application period opens, and you go in and you fill out an online application. It's a very rigorous application, a lot of open text responses where we're asking them to respond to questions that we ask to really help us make that determination of, are they a good fit for the program and do they have a need for the program? And then once all those applications are collected during the application cycle, my staff, my warrior experience team on my program team will do the initial review on all those applications, and they'll rank them based on fit and need. And then once that first review is done, it goes to other members of my staff that are not part of the program team that will also rank them on fit and need. if there's any disparities between those two rankings, then we have a conference to resolve those. And then we start stack ranking the applicants based on highest fit and highest need. Mm-hmm. They ultimately brief me on their recommended selections of who we're going to invite to participate. We do phone interviews, a 30-minute phone interview with every candidate that we're looking to place just to confirm fit and need. And then we start working to place them in a cohort in the program. So, I took a lot of the learnings that I had from assessment and selection at MARSOC and kind of applied that to how we select here because there is such high demand. And unfortunately we can't serve everyone that applies, but we're working very hard to get after that. We have a strategic plan that our goal is to double the number of veterans that we serve in the Built for More program by 2030. So working really hard to get after that gap.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
No, that's good to go. I mean, like I said, I appreciate guys like you and even other organizations that have stuck around this long. Yeah. Not to put a damper on it by any means, but like, the wars are over, I hate to say it. It's kind of out of the civilians' minds, like veterans are always, you live through it. I lived through it. I remember the height, dude. You walk into a bar in 2010, you're walking on water. It was awesome. It was great. Civilian support. Everyone kind of knew what was going on. It was that time in that era that I was in a college town here in Minnesota. And, you just go be like, hey, what do you, I was in Iraq. I was there last year, and they're just, oh my God, like, what's it like? There's interest, there was support. No one was super divided on it. It was very heavy support for the veteran community and guys getting out. It felt like it was a little more top of mind if you talk to anybody, they were all like, oh my God, yeah. How are you doing? What's going on? Is there an org you can go to? I feel like now, cause we are 15 years on and technically 2021, the war ended, we are in that, I don't know, gap, peacetime gap, where I feel like the veterans are kind of like, they're not top of mind, which is fine, but we have to help each other and seeing the organizations that are like, hey, no, this is the real shit. Like, this is what you need to do to help fix this. This is not a Band-Aid on on a blown off leg. Like, this is, we're going to help get this figured out. I think that's pretty awesome, and like I said, I'm sure I don't know if you guys feel that a little bit or what, but it does feel like you're kind of like, hey, we're not on our own, but we're like, we really need to help each other out now because it almost feels like now is the time to do it.
Yeah, we definitely see that. I tell people that I spend a lot of time trying to pull the needs of post 9/11 combat veterans out of the shadows of the American psyche. Because of everything you just said, that plus, we live in a very distracted world. There's a lot going on. And we have immediate access to it via our phones. So, the needs of post 9/11 combat veterans definitely fell out of the consciousness of the American populace. That's understandable. But, what I make sure that I try to tell everyone is, because the war's ended, just because the service members have come home, doesn't mean that those challenges stopped then. They persist. And there's a lot of evidence out there. I mean, the first that I'll point out is the suicide rate amongst veterans. 1.5 times that of the general population. It's the number 2 leading cause of death of post 9/11 combat veterans. It's doubled in our youngest cohort of veterans, the suicide rate. That's one indicator. Another indicator is just the discussions that I have with warriors coming through our program, and they feel left behind in many ways. And the fact is that a lot of our brothers and sisters have incurred challenges as a result of their service to this country in combat that are going to persist for their lifetimes. And it's our duty to make sure that our support of them is just as enduring as those challenges. And really a bigger thing is it's essential for our national defense. The fact is that last year, the U.S. military fell about 30,000 recruits short of its recruiting goal. The only service that made its recruiting goal was the United States Marine Corps. No surprise there. And U.S. Space Force. And Space Force only had to recruit 500. That's about 6 U.S. Army infantry brigades that we didn't recruit last year. And there are a lot of different reasons for that. The economy's good. But I believe a big reason behind that is the shifting perceptions around service in the military. If you look at the narrative that surrounds post 9/11 combat veterans, it's since 2006, it's been, we're either all victims of our service that are broken by it, or we're all heroes. One of those two extremes. And the fact is that the the vast majority of combat veterans are neither. They're ordinary Americans who had extraordinary experiences that were imbued with this incredible thing called a warrior ethos. And they're just looking for a hand up to continue to make a difference in their lives moving forward. So it's about changing the narrative. It's about, shining a light on these thriving veterans that can serve as exemplars and inspire the next generation to want to serve. That's a big reason why we do what we do. And the last thing is the fact is that, when veterans return home to their communities and thrive, they make America stronger. They're going to make that family stronger. They're going to make the community that they live in better. They're going to make their businesses better. If they're in government, they're going to make our government better. Thriving veterans make America stronger. So, there's a whole bunch of reasons why we need to continue to pull their needs back into the consciousness of America, because those challenges aren't over.
Yep. No, and honestly, that's a great note to end on.
Yep.
That was awesome. Well, Brian, I appreciate you coming on the podcast. Just for one more iteration, where can people find you? Where can people find the organization, and where can they go to fill everything out?
Yep. Like I said, you can go to our website, WQWF.org. We're on Instagram, Facebook, and LinkedIn as well. Just search for Wars and Quiet Waters. You can keep track of us there. And then everything you need to know about the program, how to apply, all that's on our website. So once again, Ethan, just want to say thanks for having me on. Can't appreciate enough the opportunity for us to help spread awareness about the work we're doing.
Absolutely. And I thank you for coming on. That was awesome having you.
Yeah. Hey, and thanks for your service.
Thank you.
Yeah. All right, brother.
Take care.